Right, people, we're back with another one. Now, I know I did say that I'd done enough whinging, but I can't let this one slide. This is a sort of, an explanation of my videos I've done on the Housing Association horror show. And yeah, the horror show's continued. It's got even more frightening, to be honest. Let's just start with the basics of what housing associations are. The main difference between a housing association and, say, council housing, they're both social housing, they both offer sort of affordable rents, to people in need. So, they're very similar in that respect. The difference really is who owns the properties, who owns them. In the case of a council house or council housing, it's owned by the council. It's owned by you, the taxpayer. People who pay council tax, the government. Government get their money from you, from taxation. So you in essence, own the properties. Housing associations, it's a little different. They're they're categorised as a non-for-profit, organisations. That's what they're categorised as. And, to some degree that is true. But it's a little bit deeper than that. First, they do get public money. They get direct money from, taxpayer, you, me, even me in my position. I pay tax on everything. They get direct grants, from the government directly. So a direct payment from the public purse. But they also get sort of other, perks. They get sort of preferential borrowing, which is sort of backed by the government, which is backed by you, guaranteed by you. They get funding, obviously, from the rents of the properties, that goes into the pot. But they also get borrowing from, private sources. So basically how it benefits the private sector or investors is it's a safe haven. It's a safe haven for their money. They can offer these housing associations loans with interest, obviously. Cha-ching. They get a bit of how's your father, a bit of the old, moolah. And yeah, it's all guaranteed basically, by the state, by you. So it's basically what it really is a sort of construct, for private investment, for safe investments for the private sector. It's obviously a way for, to provide housing for people in need. That's from the government's point of view, which obviously is a positive. I'm not dissing it. I'm not, dissing housing associations. And yeah, but it's also a way for large salaries to be extracted from the pot. Even though they're non-for-profit, some of the people higher up these organisations, wow, some of the pay it's extraordinary. After doing a bit of digging, I like a bit of digging. I dig it. Some of these salaries is blew my mind. You have some instances of people on £500,000 a year, and how it differs from a council housing and these housing associations. What a civil servant, which is basically someone who works for the government. What a civil servant used to do for, maybe a top civil servant used to do for, 50, 60, even 70 grand a year. They now call themselves CEOs and they're on hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. A lot of which is funded by, the people, by you. So, that's basically the short and tall of it, you know, in layman's. The basic difference is who owns the properties. It's a sort of conduit, you know, for private investors for safe investments, because it's all backed by the state, basically. You know, they're never going to lose. They're never going to. It's, you know, it's risk-free investment for them. So they offer, you know, financing and you know, they get interest on their financing, nice returns for them. And also it's a way for, you know, mostly juiced in individuals, you know, to extract massive salaries, basically. You know, not so exceptional individuals extracting exceptional salaries. And that's usually not, you know, the lads who are doing the work, you know, day to day. The lads who are working for the, you know, the repair, you know, sector of the housing association, or, you know, the day-to-day workers. They're usually on quite, you know, quite modest salaries, and, you know, they're basically, you know, working men and women just like everyone else. The main milk, where it really turns into a milking parlour, where the, you know, where it gets milked, is really at the top. You know, really high, extraordinary managerial salaries. That's the main difference. You know, that's laying it out in layman's for you. You know, it's basically a construct for private investment to have safe investments, and for people who extract massive salaries, even though it's non-for-profit. So yeah, that's the main difference. So we've got that one out of the way, and now my experience with them. Oh God. You know, this horror story started basically 2 months ago. 2 months ago, there was an issue with my mum's wet room, which obviously she needs someone to give her a shower, and it has to be a sealed wet room. Yeah, the seams of the wet room had started turning up, and obviously water had started leaching out, you know, into the passage outside. And well, you've seen the video. You know, anyone who's seen the video, the housing association horror show, you can see it. You know, it's all there, self-explanatory. I don't really need to explain it. You know, just look at the videos. Just search for, you know, housing association horror show, and you'll see. You can see where it's leached out, and yeah, you know, very problematic for, you know, someone with respiratory problems. You know, low oxygen. You know, you've got humidity off the charts. It's, you know, it's a horror show. Anyway, I report it. You know, it takes, I think it was, you know, 2 weeks to get the original repair done to the actual wet room. So that got done, you know. Lad done a good job. It was, you know, seemed thorough, all sweet. But then we started noticing that the carpet, obviously in the, you know, the passage in our mum's room, was sodden. And obviously, you know, this is something that's happened over, you know, weeks and months, not days. So it's slowly but surely worked its way out. So even though the repair was done, the water is still obviously under there, and it's still kind of slowly leaching out, slowly but surely. So anyway, 10 days after the repair, I sort of come to the conclusion that this isn't gonna, you know, dry. The carpet's sodden, so ripped all the carpets up, you know, in the hope that it might dry. You know, I thought, and, you know, to actually see what the situation is. It was quite worse than what I actually thought. So basically, I persevered for like 10 days. I thought, you know, I'll get a dehumidifier. I bought a dehumidifier. I even tried like sort of sheets, you know, putting sheets down on the flooring. Anyway, to no avail. It was, you know, it wasn't, you know, it was futile, basically. Futile. So I ring up to, you know, tell them about the situation and the urgency of the situation. And, you know, they seem to have this obsession with a third-party form. A third-party authorisation form, which I'd handed in 3 times prior over over these last few years. I sent 2 in by post, and I actually, in February of 2025, so last year, I actually hand delivered the form to the head office in person, in the flesh, baby. I went there in the flesh, and still there was no record of it. So you have high salaries being extracted, but an inability to even file simple forms. It's like, rudimentary filing. So obviously, it's like, anyway, they send me the form, I sent it in for a 4th time, but basically it took them, I think for me, reporting the issues with the side effects of the leak, it's took them basically the best part of 3 weeks. The best part of 3 weeks, even though I told them the urgency, I explained the situation. But to be fair, you can't really jump the queue. There's lots of other tenants who need, repairs. So I thought, that's fair enough. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You can't jump the queue. You have to get in line like everyone else. So in the lead up to the repair day, or which I thought was the repair day, which was yesterday, the 19th, I'd basically been in constant contact with them, telling them basically, I'd give them detailed pictures of it. I told them that, the urgency of the situation, what actually it entailed on the day to move my mum out of the room, which she's bedbound in. She's got a hoist. You have to be hoisted out of bed and then put into a chair. Then we have to wheel her into the other room. It's, she doesn't like it in the chair. She was agitated. She was a bit upset. So I explained every facet of it, every detail. I went into so much detail. I was being a bit, overbearing with it. I admit. I was sort of, I was trying to coordinate for them, because I'd sort of experienced all this incompetence. And I got the right messages. They were like, yeah, we understand, we know the situation. The coordinator's in charge of it, they know the situation. So we're getting ready for the repair. It's the 19th. It's a day. We're going to get this sorted, Mum. You don't have to smell this fucking stench, and you don't have to have this, mould everywhere. So 9:30, we were told 9:30 a.m. The lads will be there. So, we're all set. She's been in a chair since 7 a.m. because that's when the personal care call comes. So she's been in a chair since 7 a.m. 9:30 comes. Okay. 10:30. 11:30. 12:30. 1:30. Anyway, someone turns up at, I think it was 2:15. 2:15 p.m. Just one guy turns up. He's like, oh yeah, will you have a look at the job? I said, oh God, I said, it's just you, and I thought you weren't going to turn up. So basically, he just looks at it and he's like, oh God, this is going to be an all day job, this. And I was like, well, I told them every facet of the job. I told them every detail of it. And he's just obviously a joiner. He's not someone who's coordinated this or any sort of manager in this. He's basically just been told to attend. So he basically he has a look at it. He does a few he chips a bit of the board out, and he's like, oh God, this is going to be all day. So basically just an assessment. So 3 weeks just to get an assessment of the job. And then he said it could be another 3 weeks to a month to actually get the job done. Which is, adding up to months in a sodden, rotten, mouldy room for a disabled woman. It's it's a horror show for me. It's a nightmare. It really is. So basically now we're just waiting to hear when this actual repair will be done. But it seems like there's a real streak of incompetence in these organisations, and that is kind of true to type. Because a lot of managerial appointments are cronyistic in nature. A lot of nepotism, which is sort of getting your family in there. Cronyism is kind of your friends, your cohorts. You might have went to uni with them. You might have whatever. Them. You're in. You're like that with them, so you'll get them in there. And yeah, it seems like a real streak of incompetence. Almost, I'd say, being obtuse about it, like deliberately sort of obtuse. At least it seems that way. And then to add insult to injury, right outside my mum's bedroom window, there's raw sewage spewing out of the drains. It's like you couldn't make this up. It's like, is this a is this a horror movie? So it's bad enough you've got a rotten stinking floor full of mould and God knows the fumes that are coming off that thing. And you open your window to get some air in, it's like rotten raw sewage spewing out of the floor, spewing out of the drains. Well, the video's there. Just look for horror show part 2, housing association horror show. This is a housing association horror show. Today's Friday. Friday in the 13 group, basically. Instead of Friday the 13th, it's Friday in the 13 group. It's a horror show. So, yeah, been a nightmare, basically. I know I said that, I didn't want to do any more whinging, but I couldn't let this one slip. This is just ridiculous. The real lack of competence in coordinating it, the real lack of caring in, the situation that she's in. Simple coordinating the job without any ability to think, right, maybe we need to send someone to have a look at the job before the job date. Tell me you couldn't have had one of the lads pop in for 10 seconds just to have a look at it. And the thing was, one of the, a member of staff from the head office was actually at my mum's, 2 days prior to the job getting to pick up the authorisation form, which was so obsessed about the thing that I'd handed in 4 times. An inability to do rudimentary filing. An inability to coordinate simple jobs. Basically, a sort of, a milking parlour for, for quite average individuals to extract extraordinary salaries. And ultimately, the outcomes are terrible. It's leading to terrible outcomes because competence isn't the number one factor in, recruitment. That's how I'd sum it up. When competence isn't the number one factor, it leads to bad outcomes. So, it's an upsetting situation. It's something I had to share. I had to get off my chest. But I imagine it's like this for everyone else. I'm not thinking it's something just personal to us or whatever. I imagine lots of other people have this experience with them. So, yeah. Housing Association horror show. Friday in the 13 group. So, yeah. I suppose I'll do an update on this. I'm in total limbo now. We don't know when it's going to get done or how it's going to get done. They've sort of, provided a couple of dehumidifiers, but we had a dehumidifier anyway, so that's no good. We want someone out to do the job. Maybe, maybe the salaries are, that they're extracting. I mean, they're not employing enough, repair people, enough maintenance staff. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit above my station to start critiquing it in that sense, but But yeah, this is no knock on the average person that are working for these organisations, you know. They're just doing the best they can. It seems like on the managerial level there's a streak of incompetence. You know? Yeah. Inability to do simple things, you know, inability to coordinate or to actually have some, you know, critical thinking on, you know, situations like that with my mum. You know, can we really afford to drag this out for months? If this is just an assessment, maybe you need to pop in for, 10 minutes before the date to actually know what this entails. And I told them every aspect. I'd been so detailed in what it entailed and what the job was. So many pictures, absolutely, I'd been so thorough. I expected nothing to go wrong. I thought you'd have to be, an half-wit to not be able to coordinate this and make it right in a timely fashion. But, maybe I expect too much. I don't know. Maybe I'm overcritical. But yeah. So yeah, I've laid it out in layman's for you. And I think that's going to be a series that I'm going to do, laying things out in layman's. Taking certain issues, and putting it in layman's terms. Yeah, I think I might do that. But yeah, disappointed, so I have to get this off my chest. Hopefully, I'll do an update on the horror show. It's an ongoing thing. But hopefully this will be the last, whinge. I don't want this to turn into the whinging channel. I want some positivity, I want some positive energy up in here. I posted a little workout, just messing around last night, what I was eating and stuff. So I want to, I want it more like that. I don't want it just to be constantly whinging about things. But to me, it just seemed like it was almost obtuse. That's the word. Like deliberately sort of being, uncaring or whatever. You've got a disabled woman rotting in that, and then you've got feces outside a bedroom. It's like, this is a horror show. These are like slum landlords, and you look at some of these beauties at the top of it, some of the salaries, it's unbelievable. Millions from the taxpayer in direct grants, subsidised lending, guaranteed by you and me and everyone else, while they milk these massive salaries, and yet they can't do rudimentary repairs. They can't coordinate rudimentary repairs. Their obsession with these forms, which I've handed in 4 times, it's like, it seems like they're more concerned about forms. But strangely enough, when money needs to be talked about, when if you're in any arrears or you're in any way like that, they weren't bothered about the forms. They didn't care. So you have a situation where they'll gladly talk about highly sensitive financial issues in the third party sense, but there's a big to-do about doing simple repairs in the third party sense, reporting repairs and coordinating repairs. I needed to coordinate for them because things that had happened prior to this showed me that there was not a lot of competence there, so I needed to be overbearing. Some of the emails I've sent, it's so detailed, I've spelled so much out. It's like I should be coordinating. I think I'd do a better job, frankly. So yeah, that's it now. I've had a whinge. I've got it off my chest. I feel better. So yeah, I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it. It had to be laid out in layman's. Yeah. So we'll leave it there. Hopefully this will be the last one. We want some, love and positivity up in here. I don't want to just be the malcontent. I want to be content. Okay? Content in my content, not the malcontent. Content in my content. Alright. Right, we'll leave it there. So I'm signing off for another one. This will be the last whinge, hopefully. If these guys can get their act together and get this, get this horrible situation from our, disabled mother sorted out, then this will be the last whinge by me. So yeah, peace out. Much love. And we'll see you in the next one. Coming at you.